Hi, this is Phil. This is my 2018 Turbo Dynamics. I have about 3,800 miles on the machine, and I've noticed lately that my clutch is acting up a little bit. Once in a while, when I put it into gear, it seems to want to engage. It doesn't free wheel, and it feels like it's pulling on it, like it's semi-engaged. Also, when you change the gears from park to drive or to high, it doesn't always shift as smoothly as it could. Sometimes it shifts smoothly, and other times it kind of hangs up a little bit between the gears. And it's kind of tied in with when you put it in reverse or low or high, that many times it'll engage, semi-engage. So I'm going to go ahead and disassemble both the primary and the secondary clutch. I'm going to remove them, and I'm going to take them apart, and I'm going to see if I can determine what's causing my problem. I'll look for worn parts or possibly broken parts, and I will walk you through the process. Okay, I'm going to remove the secondary clutch. Take your tool and completely spread the sheaves to allow the belt to relax or the belt to be removed. In either case, once the belt is removed, remove your tool. This bolt that holds the clutch on is torqued at 40 pounds. I've already released the 40 pounds. I'll remove the bolt, which will reveal a washer with a recessed area, and the recessed area fits over the top of a snap ring. The snap ring is what holds the secondary clutch onto the shaft. So once the belt is removed, the bolt is removed, you can remove the snap ring. Once the snap ring is removed, it will expose this washer with the recessed area, which slips over the snap ring to hold it in place. And then there's a washer spacer behind that. So you have these two items, and then your clutch is free, and your clutch can be removed from the shaft. Okay, I've removed the secondary clutch. I'll remove the primary, and once I get the clutches off and on the bench, then I'll disassemble them and look for any worn or broken parts. Okay, so this is the secondary clutch. This is a clutch tool that I purchased from Hunter Works, and what it is it just compresses the spring to allow you to take the parts apart. So what I've done here is I've installed the compression tool. It holds the spring in place, holds this unit in place. It's held in place with 3 star bolts. I broke them loose with a ratchet wrench because they were pretty tight. And what you'll always want to do when you're working on any of the clutch parts, or for that matter anything else, try to put stuff back the same way it came apart. It's all worn together in such a manner as the parts, when they're matched up, the wear is even. If you start mismatching the parts, you could see some potential problems. So what I've done here, I've marked the clutch, exterior clutch housing, and also the device here has got an X, and then these have X's to show everything will go back the way it came apart. So as I say, I've already loosened the star bolts. And remember, when you put this thing back together, always use a little blue Loctite on your bolts to keep them from vibrating loose. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and release the tension. Okay, and as this releases, the spring is relaxed, allowing you to take apart the various components. And once again, try to remember where they all go, the same order. And one of the things I read on the internet was that this spring sometimes doesn't seat properly down inside the housing. This one looks like it's just fine. It's not resting on any surfaces. It's flush against the back part of the housing, which is what you want. Okay, I'm going to remove these sliders, and I will show you how they're worn. You can see on one surface, you might be able to see that how much that it's worn. It's okay on this side. Assume that it only runs on the one side. So I will go ahead and buy a rebuilt kit to replace all these sliders. The same with these sliders down mounted in this side of the secondary clutch. They're also worn on the edges, as you can see. You can see how worn it is on the edge. So between these two, there's quite a bit of wear. So that's what I'll be replacing with the rebuild kit. I've removed the sliders from both halves of the clutch, and I've put everything back together, just set it back together just to leave it in place. It's all lined up and so on. I'll order the parts, and once I get the new parts, I'll take it apart and we'll reassemble. Okay, we got the new sliders and sliders for both halves of the clutch. So first of all, we're going to go ahead and replace and don't forget to use a little blue Loctite on each of the bolts. As the sliders are returned to their proper places, okay, the lower sheave, as you can see by the mark, will replace the top sheave in line with the marks, and then it's time to replace the sheaves in the top half. Okay, and then it's time to return the helix, spring, and the cover. Make sure that the spring is seated on the back side of the housing, so it's not raised or it's not being impeded by anything when it's set back on. Spacer goes back the way it came off, and having the X's and the helix in place. And using the compression tool, actually it would have been better to put the compression tool in place and then set everything the way it's supposed to be. Everything is centered and lined up. Okay, make sure all of our X's are lined up where they're supposed to be. And it's a matter of compressing the spring. Once again, lining up the marks and the holes. Once you have everything back in place, then it's time to return the star bolts that hold the whole unit in place. Helix, cover, spring, and since these star bolts were rather tight when I remove them, when I loosen them, I'm going to retorque them, not to a certain foot-pounds, but just to a strong enough torque that I know they'll won't come loose. There we go. It's a matter of loosening the compression tool. And once the compression tool is released, your clutch now is ready to reinstall. Making sure your housing, the clutch housing, the shafts, everything is spotless, and then we're ready to reinstall the secondary clutch. Okay, so with your secondary clutch back on the shaft, be sure it's pushed all the way back to expose the little groove where your snap ring fits. Also, you'll want to make sure that when you take your, when you return your parts to the secondary clutch, you return them in exactly the opposite order as they were removed. So the thin washer with the hole goes first, then the recess, the washer with the lip that accommodates the snap ring goes next, which allows the groove to be exposed for the snap ring, and then your snap ring. So when your snap ring is on, make sure that it fits into the groove nice and cleanly with no obstructions, and then you're ready for your bolt. So as mentioned earlier, always use a little bit of blue Loctite on the bolts that you don't want to come loose, and this bolt gets torqued at 40 foot-pounds. Once you've blue Loctited your secondary clutch bolt, it's time to torque it at 40 pounds, and you might have to improvise a little bit to find yourself a device which will hold it in place, but this carpenter square works pretty well. And 40 pounds it is. Your secondary clutch is installed. Okay, so it's time to take off the primary clutch. I've already loosened this bolt. These are torqued at 95 pounds, so they're a little bit stiff. But anyway, what you want to do is put some kind of a device, large screwdriver or breaker bar, to hold the clutch in place while you break the nut loose. Nut comes out. Remember, you got 2 washers on here. And then you have a removal tool. I also purchased this from Hunter Works in Mississippi. Okay, I'll come back in a minute. In order to get this primary clutch off, sometimes they're a little more difficult, especially the first time they ever come off. And it's a matter of putting the tool inside of the primary clutch, and you're going to have to use quite a lot of pressure. Get it as tight as you can get it, and then you have to tap. And you might have to do this several times to get that primary clutch to break loose. They say you don't want to put too much pressure on it because you can damage the tool and or the clutch or the crankshaft. So just enough pressure and tension to pop it loose. Remember, have a nice firm bar to hold the clutch in place while you're going through this procedure. So after hammering on this thing a while, finally it gave loose. Tighten, tighten, tap, tap, tighten, tighten, tap, tap, and so on until it finally came loose, and it did. So the tool itself just screws out of the clutch. Okay, be back in. Okay, and once again we're going to mark the clutch so we know it comes apart the same way. Mark the inside, mark every surface that you can remind yourself where it goes. So when you go to put it back together, you can get it back the way it came apart. Okay, then you're going to use your clutch spring tool Okay, coming back in a minute. Okay, so I've removed the 6 bolts that hold this piece down to the clutch. It's spring loaded. Remove that. The spacer washer comes off. It goes a certain way because it has a ridge here that this spring fits around. So it fits inside that spring. That comes like that. Spring comes next. And then what you have some sliders right here. And I know they make an aftermarket slider that slides over the top of that, and I think I'm going to order some of those. But while the clutch is apart, while the primary clutch is apart, I'll go ahead and remove all of the weights and inspect those and make sure the bushings that the bolt rides on are not worn out. And I'll be back. Okay, so the weights are held by a pin. You want to check that pin for wear. This one looks just fine. The weights actually look good. Looks like there's no noticeable wear on any of the surfaces that would normally wear, especially in this area where the bushings are. But everything seems to be nice and tight. So the weights seem to be fine. And then in each one of these little sliders here, there's a piece. And what you can do is look at this guy and you can see where the sliders have been moving up and down, and it's visible only. There's no grooves, there's no feel to any wear, just visible only, and it looks just fine. Everything's nice and smooth, and the sliders themselves look good. So it looks like possibly this primary clutch can just be cleaned up and put back together, and I think we're good to go on that. Okay, as further inspecting the primary clutch, this bearing bushing in the middle, make sure that turns freely, looks fine. And then beneath each one of these arms, there's a little roller right on the inside, and you can feel it by reaching through, and as you turn it, it spins freely. And when you put your weights back in, the little pin that holds the weights uses a locking nut on the other end, so you don't need any Loctite on the pin that holds your weight in place. It's a 10mm nut, and I don't know what size this Allen wrench is. Oh, it's a 1/8 Allen wrench on the head. Now, when you've got your clutch off the machine, or whether it's on or off the machine, it's always smart to rough up these sheaves. In other words, they build up a glaze from the belt, and that glaze. So whether it's your secondary or your primary clutch, the sheaves on both surfaces need to be cleaned up. They need to be either with emery cloth or Scotch-Brite, and you clean them from the inside out as opposed to lengthways. So once they're good and clean, as you can see, I've already prepared these. They're already nice and clean. The final step is to use a little brake cleaner and make sure you wipe down those sheaves completely, getting all the residue off. You can see it gets dirty, and then hit it again the second time, and if it's still not clean, hit it again until it is. Now, in order to replace the primary clutch, we want to make sure that all the housing is clean, wiped down, no burrs, everything is nice and spotless. So when we return the primary clutch to the crankshaft, we repeat the process of removal. We just reverse the process of removal, put the primary clutch back in, and then torque to 95 pounds. Okay, so from a little different view, we're torquing the bolt that holds the primary clutch on to 95 pounds. Okay, 95 pounds it is. Then you can remove the bar that held it in place, and your torque is complete. Your primary clutch is reinstalled. And then once your sheaves have been spread using your clutch belt tool, then it's time to work the clutch back, or the belt back onto the clutch. Once the clutch is in place, or the belt is in place, remove your belt tool. Once your belt tool is removed, you want to spin your clutch, your secondary clutch, about 5 times. That will help. The sheaves will close and the belt will seat. And then it's always wise to start it up, start the motor up without the clutch cover, and let everything seat in place, and you can re-inspect everything, make sure everything looks like it's in place. Well, that pretty much settles the clutch issue. Replace your clutch cover, your air intake, and you're good to go. Thanks for watching.